We have the patch notes for Update 38 Corsairs of Umbar for the Lord of the Rings Online. Umbar is releasing on November 8th, with maintenance from 9 AM to 1 PM Eastern Time. Kind of unusual for me, I actually plan to stream at the launch once the servers come up tomorrow. So that will be tomorrow from this video, but today the focus is on a review of the patch. Now, I already had a video on what you can expect to come with Umbar, but this video will have more details on different things, and we do have some new developments. Also for this video, I would like to point out the different bundles you can get for the Corsairs of Umbar expansion, which you will need at the very least the standard edition in the LOTRO market to actually be able to play the expansion content. So the standard edition, as typical for LOTRO expansions, is about $40, with the collector's edition here being $80 essentially, and then about $130 for the ultimate fan bundle, which includes a lot of bonuses. I do have a video with more details on that, but again, the important thing with these bundles is that you get the Corsairs of Umbar content and the Mariner class with all three bundles. Now you may be wondering, what is the Corsairs of Umbar expansion content? Well, it includes, as they say here, over 350 unique quests inside the expansion's 4 new regions. So we are going to avoid story spoilers here, but essentially there is more of Gondor, and this will include the regions of Western King's Gondor, also Outer Gondor, the Shield Isles of Umbar, and then actually the Cape of Umbar, which includes the city of Umbar, Umbar Barhabel. Now, one very important detail that is kind of interesting in the patch notes here is they say, dive into pulse-pounding instances and gain access to an exciting new raid. Prepare for an adventure like no other. Yet we do know that there will actually be no new dungeon or raid content launching with the expansion, and these are actually expected to be released after this expansion launch, so we're mainly getting the questing content and the story content in this update. But of course, for in-game content, we have the delving system, and we even have featured instances and some other things that should, in theory, scale to level 150 with the launch of Umbar here. There is, of course, the potential for some in-game landscape content as well as new missions, which could potentially include new delvings and maybe some non-dungeon instance content. But we will have to wait to see with that, and I will point out for the story, so if you need to do chapter 1 still, or book 1 of the Song of Waves and Wind, you can start that actually from Glyndor and Minas Tirith, and it looks like the book 2, or as they're calling it chapter 2 here, that will be started also from Glyndor and Minas Tirith, which I believe is not the location that the end of book 1 left off. Personally, I am super excited to explore the landscape and what new content we have, so that's why I'm actually going to be changing things up with my plan, at least for expansion launch, which is to actually level or take a higher level character through the new areas. That way I can focus a bit more on exploration and actually going through all the new regions, as well as just seeing what else there is that is new. I really love that discovery phase with an expansion, but another thing that I am really excited for is the crafting overhaul. They have very few details of what we can actually expect with the crafting overhaul in the patch notes, though, it looks like. So it is possible that maybe not everything that we actually expected to be with the launch of the expansion is even in this. But what they do have noted here first is that vocations have been removed, and you can now train for the professions individually. So for your crafting professions, you will keep whatever you have right now on your character, but you can talk to a profession trainer to swap to a different one if you like. And when you are a new character picking up crafting for the first time, you will just select which professions you want. Still, you can only have up to 3 professions, but I believe in the future they are planning to implement a 4th option for your profession, likely for Mithril Coin, as you can get like a new spec set for your character with different trait configurations. That's at least what I anticipate it being like, but otherwise they don't really have many details beyond that. So there are a few things that we expected with the crafting revamp, notably being able to gather any tier of material, any tier of resource with the gathering professions, regardless of your actual tier that you have unlocked. For the gathering professions, the main point of ranking them up, like past apprentice, so you go like journeyman, etc., the main point of that will be to process materials, but they don't actually have anything about that on the patch notes. So I'm a little bit concerned at this point that that won't actually be in game, but time will tell. There is also, of course, a whole bunch of changes or just new things really with the Umbar tier of crafting that is going to be significantly different from some of the previous tiers. So I'm super excited to discover what all that entails with the full launch of the expansion, because it was very, very unfinished and unrefined in the last round of the beta. Now, a pretty big thing that they seem to have kind of left off the patch notes here actually has to do with enhancement runes. So all they have here is that in light of changes to enhancement runes, many scaling instances now reward, that should be fewer, rare enhancement runes than before. The reason for that is because enhancement runes are so much more useful than they used to be. So essentially the amount of item levels that your enhancement runes level up your tracers is going to be based on the rarity. So yellow enhancement runes will give you 1 rank, and then purple will give you 2 rank, and so on from there. That also means, for example, for the teal enhancement rune, there's going to be no maximum level for its enhancement limit anymore. Now for the beta, this only applied to the Umbar tier for your legendary items, but it is possible that they have fully implemented this throughout the full leveling experience of your LIs. That is just something to be aware of, and I think this is a huge change coming in Umbar, and it really has some great potential for catch-up mechanics and just being a lot more player friendly. I'm very much so looking forward to this, if you cannot tell. Now there are a couple other more important item and balance changes in regards to the way essences work, as well as main stats and even armor. So to break that down a little bit, I think it's useful to first look at the main stats. So they are making a little revamp to the main stats. So this will include things like agility, fate, might, vitality, and will. So your main stat for your class will still provide you the most benefit. So that includes things like agility, for example, for the warden, that will include might for the guardian, and that will include will for the runekeeper, just for some examples. So you can expect that part to stay the same. But for the other stats, the other 2 stats, if you're a runekeeper, you will actually get some benefit from might and agility. It probably won't be a huge benefit specifically for the runekeeper, but you might see some interesting things with, say, more versatile classes, like, say, the captain, for example. Now, that all also works into the essence changes. So this is something you're probably going to primarily see with, it says, as of U38 gear, so probably with Umbar gear to start. It's possible that some of the old gear pieces will have some of this change, but I would expect, if so, they're just going to still just be regular essence slots. But you will have gear that could feature 3 different types of essence slots. You have primary essence slots, which allow you to do the main stat essences. This will be might, agility, or will. And then you also have a vital essence slot. This will include things like vitality, fate, morale, or power. And finally, you have your regular essence slots, which is going to be like the standard gear essences that we have now, and it's going to be overall, it sounds like, similar frequency and number of them that you have with current gear. Now, an important change with all this is that the stat value of essences is going to be lower. That means the overall effectiveness of your gear is going to be more based on the base stats on the gear rather than the essences. Personally, I'm really looking forward to this because I feel like there's a little bit too much emphasis on the essences, or maybe really a lot more focus on the essences than there should be, so I am personally looking forward to this. Now, I will point out on every single class that I checked in the beta, and of course things can change from beta, that is very, very important note, but on every single class that I checked, fate was basically a useless stat, and that does mean it's even less useful than at least it was before Umbar. And by useless, I really mean that it just gave you power and out of combat power regen. But if you actually find yourself needing that stat, then potentially Fate could be useful for you. But this is just a little bit of a heads up that Fate is probably not going to be the most appealing stat, and even less appealing than it was before after this update. Again, though, your mileage may vary, and it could be different from what it was in the first beta round, but I think it is, again, something important to be aware of. Now, there are 2 more important changes with stats, and the first is going to be with critical rating here. Essentially, the crit rating cap has been increased. We don't know what it has been increased to, but also the amount of critical rating that you get from different sources is also going to be increased. Now, along with that, though, the critical magnitude cap has been reduced. So as they do say here, this should make it actually more difficult to achieve the crit chance cap, because especially late in the expansion cycle, it tends to be fairly easy, but then it will also make it easier to increase your dev crit and crit magnitude caps. And moving forward, the last important note here with the stat revamp is actually going to be to armor. So armor value on gear in the level 150 band, so that's pretty much going to be any Umbar gear level 141 to 150, that will actually be lower than some of the previous level caps. And the reason it sounds like is so it makes it harder to actually cap physical mitigation. In particular, they were focused here on heavy armor characters can cap their physical mitigation a little bit too easily for them. On top of that, the effectiveness of the armor, at least on the shields, has also been reduced. And then here's one of those random notes that is a huge delight, and it is on some cosmetic and functional improvements. So they've made UI improvements essentially to the tracery and essence socketing user interface. In particular, for LIs, you can actually drag those in a horizontal direction to help the crowding of tracery names and descriptions. I'm looking forward to that. I know I've complained a lot about the LI user interface with the revamp, so hopefully this makes it at least a little bit better. And speaking of random notes that are a delight, potion vendors will sell level 150, they call it poison, disease, fear, and wound, or basically your debuff removal potions. They will sell those at the potion vendors. Now, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I actually don't remember for the longest while. I think it was something like level 100 or 105 was the last time we could actually purchase these potions from a vendor. Again, I could be totally mistaken on this, but that's why it stands out so much to me, just because I don't remember it for so long, and something I'm very much so looking forward to, at least. Okay, we actually do have one more very negative thing here with stats, and that is essentially that pay to win has been a little bit increased, at least in LOTRO. At least that's my takeaway message from this line, and that stat tomes now offer a smoother progression of bonuses from level to level. That probably just means they've updated it, so they're actually more useful, and that means you can buy them from the LOTRO store to make your character permanently more powerful, and they'll actually probably be a little bit effective. We'll have to see the exact values on them though. But in better news, we have a graphics update for LOTRO. It's not a massive graphics update, but there is, in particular for the DX10 dynamic shadow setting, they're going to add a new tier to that. So what used to be very high will be brought down to high, and the new very high will include some improvements for the distance that shadows are rendered, as well as adding terrain to the shadow caster list. And we also get an increase to the shadow map resolution to reduce pixelization. I'm looking forward to see if I even notice any difference, but at the very least, nice to see we are getting a graphics update. And all right, we're bouncing all over the place today, but I'm doing this so it hopefully flows better. But we're going to talk a little bit about some combat changes. So player melee skill ranges, these are going to be normalized. So a lot of damaging melee skills for your single target abilities will have a max range of 4 meters, and AoEs will have a max range of 5 meters, which depending on your class and the particular ability, this could be a pretty drastic change. They do still say that there are some exceptions, so I'd expect something like the Warden's Melee Resounding Challenge will be an exception, and perhaps some of the bigger champion AoEs I could see being an exception, and if not, that is actually a huge nerf to those. Depending on your perspective, sometimes they do pull extra mobs that you don't want, but it's a huge nerf to the funness of them from my perspective at least. But again, we'll see if there are some exceptions with those particular cases. Also, this is very random note here. I was going to talk about the Beornings. It looks like they gain 1 meter of extra melee range, so that'd probably be something like 6 meters for their AoEs and 5 meters for their single target things when they're in bear form. But then they have this couple sentences randomly placed in the same bullet point that relates to crafting and critical rating. So, well, not critical rating, but crit crafting. It looks like this is a display issue where critical success will have a higher item level and stats than the base result, which I believe should be the case, and there is a display issue where that's probably not showing properly based on this if you run into that, and we're also caught off guard by this random note right here. It also looks like for brawlers they used to have this melee range tracery, but it's changed so you can't actually get bonus melee range as a brawler from that, and aggressive posture damage is what that's now going to be. Also, an interesting change is some area of effect skills, don't know which, but some of them will have their base number of targets increased. I'll be excited to find out which ones. I really like having details of like actually which abilities would have this change, similar with the exceptions to the AoE range and even the single target, the melee abilities range. I would love to see those, but there's also the exciting element of discovery in game that they're trying to keep here, maybe. Now, also related to combat, just a quick note that generic monster range attacks will not have a minimum distance, so you might notice some new behaviors from ranged mobs because they don't have a minimum distance there. And you will also see, especially for low-level monsters probably, that their power scaling was a bit odd, so they were running out of power too quickly, so basically low-level monsters will have more power is what I take away from this. And for those of you with finesse that still see partial BPEs against you, well, the damage reduction from those partial BPEs will be reduced with that. That seems like it would fit better in the stat changes, but here we go. But those are just some general combat changes coming to LOTRO. There are some other specific class changes. Good news for the Beowardings, they are becoming closer to a full class. One day they might make it into a full class for the game, but some of their barters and instance rewards for their gear have been updated and fixed. It looks like there are a few bug fixes as well as some minor balance changes to counter. So counter attack will let you consume the recently evaded effect that you can get from when you evade while you have counter active. And this will let you continue to regain that recently evaded effect. Also, the counter evade chance has been increased to 15% while active, and that used to be 10%. And for burglars, they can use provoke a little bit more frequently with a cooldown reduction by 2 seconds on that. And it looks like they have fixed threat generation with captain tanking. So when you're spec'ing the yellow line, most damaging captain skills will generate additional threat, as they should. And that same fix is actually applying to the champion. I don't know if that means for champion tanks that they will finally be considered viable, but it is something to be aware of because I have heard from people that have tried to tank on champion. That's actually been one of the bigger issues that I guess this entire time, that they haven't actually properly been generating extra threat with their abilities, which of course is the way that the other tank specs work. Also, it's kind of interesting with Shadow's Lament, that cooldown has been reduced by 5 seconds, which is pretty sizable. I'm interested in testing that out on my captain. And then Impactful Blows, that is going to increase weapon damage by up to 10% here. I feel like I remember this change happening at some point, but I'm probably getting it mixed up with something else. But for Lore Masters, their Burning Embers will deal partial pulses. So when you upgrade or downgrade your Embers tier, you won't actually lose damage from that, which of course is nice. It looks like there are a few bug fixes with the Mariner, which you could basically expect because it is a new class, but there is also a little bit of a buff to their healing potential from some of their traits. That's probably going to be mostly in blue line if I remember correctly, and also the crit defense debuff from the Northwind is buffed. But then there is one, I don't know, depending how your perspective, it could be a good or bad thing, but Fletch, that ability used to move your character. You would go forward and then back. But they said it was not smooth enough on the live servers, so they are getting rid of that effect. And it is true that it wasn't the most smooth of effects, even if it was a kind of neat one to me. And finally, the last class change here is going to be for Runekeeper. So Concession Rebuttal is a combat-only skill, and it has a fix to the description that it has a attunement requirement when it doesn't. There is actually one piece of content information that I forgot to mention, but with featured instances, I mentioned that that would be one form of in-game content that you will have with the launch of Umbar. So the featured instance rotation has been updated to include these instances, and importantly, a couple of these are also delving, so if those are the featured instance, you might be able to double dip on rewards with that. Also, a nice quality of life change here is when you enter or leave an instance, your morale will be fully restored. And that also includes on login, it looks like. No longer the days of logging in with most of your health missing in LOTRO. I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest. It's of course going to be nice, but it's been that way for what feels like forever in the game. So that is pretty much everything in the quest, deeds, and adventure areas. There are a whole bunch of bug fixes here, and then there are also some PvMP changes, but as you all probably know, I don't really play that, so I don't have too many details on that. You can, of course, read that if you're interested in it. I know I'm really looking forward to sailing to Umbar, going through the quest content, and exploring all that we have with the new locations. But let me know what your thoughts are on the expansion as we are approaching launch here. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching, everyone.